Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Brown Overboard. I'm your host, Josh Bam Bam Brown, and I thought I would sit down tonight with y'all guys for a little one-on-one. Something that I wanted to talk about, that we've talked about in the past briefly. We've touched on it in the show a little bit, and we've spoken about it somewhat on our different social media, but I don't know how much we've actually ever gone in depth about it, is where the show came from. Where did the Alaskan Bush People come from? How did it happen? How did we end up going from a bush family that lived in the middle of nowhere and hardly ever saw anyone to a family that was on the Discovery Channel putting their life out there for millions and millions of people? And it's definitely something that y'all guys have shown interest in hearing about, and so I thought I would talk about that tonight. Now, it all started a very long time ago. And I think the initial catalyst for us going from obscurity into being in the spotlight all started with my dad's books. Now, y'all guys may or may not know that my dad was actually quite a bit of a writer. So my dad, he loved to write. And long story, sort of short, when he was a teenager, he used to be in a band, and his sister and he would write music, words and music for songs for his band. Now, his sister was like a prodigy, played the piano since she was like 2 years old, played all kinds of classical music and did concerts and, actual like classical concerts and all kinds of things. And Dad started a garage band, and he and his sister would write words and music for the band, and he loved to do this. It was something that he had a real passion for. But my dad was orphaned at 16. He lost his mom, dad, and his older sister in a plane crash in Texas. And after that, my dad said that he never even thought about writing anything again. He just put that aside, and it was too painful for him to continue to do that. And it was a part of his life and who he was that he really just stopped. Now, from the time that he was orphaned until he was in his 40s, he never wrote more than a grocery list. But there was one night that we went on a bit of an adventure, and this is actually in my dad's autobiography, One Wave at a Time. So if you want the long version of this story, y'all guys can go check out the book. But my dad, he wanted to write about this night that we had where we went out to move our boat one night because we were living in Haines at this time, and our boat was moored at the cannery side. So there were two docks in Haines. There's the regular dock, and then there's the cannery dock that fishermen use during the fishing season. But in the winter, it blows really hard into that harbor, and it gets really nasty, and nobody keeps their boat over winter there. So we went into town one night to move the boat. It was super late, really stormy, and we were just going to move it around to the other side. It was my dad, myself, and a couple of my siblings. And it was supposed to only take about 2 hours. It takes about an hour and a half to go around. And in bad weather, it can take a little bit longer. But that night took us about 9 hours to move that boat, to go what should have been an hour and a half, 2 hour trip. It was really harrowing, and there was a lot of things that went down that night, and it was not easy to do what we did. And my dad wanted to write about it when, over the next couple of days once we got back. And so he did. He sat down and he wrote about it. And that was the first thing that he had written since he was a teenager. And he said the floodgates just kind of opened after that. And he started just writing all kinds of stuff. He said that it was just there. It was like it was in the air, and he just started picking it out of the air. So Dad, after that point, he started writing like crazy, and he wrote poems and limericks and all kinds of things. And it gradually grew into being longer things. And then there was this one night, Gaby, my little brother, who's always been a really good artist. Even when he was really little, he was very good at drawing. So Gaby, he drew this picture of a beaver, and it wasn't a technical, beaver. The beaver had like overalls and had like tools and stuff. He drew more like a Disney style cartoon character of a beaver, and he wanted Dad to name the beaver. So he goes up to Dad and he's like, Dad, what is this beaver's name? And Dad took one look at this beaver and he goes, "That's Edwin T. Flattail. Let me tell you about that beaver." And he went on to tell Gaby all about this beaver's life. On the spot, Dad made up this whole story about the beaver and who he was and how he lived his life and how he built dams and rivers and homes for all the animals and who his friends were and all these things. And when he got through telling the story, I went up to Dad and was like, "Dad, you got to write that down. That's too good. You got to write that down." So that was really one of the first children's stories. I guess that was the first children's story that Dad ever wrote. And from that point on, he started writing more and more children's stories. And then the books got longer and longer. And he started writing more adventure novels, like young adult adventure novels and things. Now, fast forward a while, and we started getting really into Dad's books, right? He would write during the day, and then at night he would read us what he had written, and it was very much like episodic, because we would hear the page. We would get to experience the pages that he had written for the story as he was writing it. So we'd write like a few pages during the day and then read them to us at night, like by the campfire. And we got really enthusiastic about them, and we saw real potential in these stories, and we wanted to actually like make something of them. And we tried to draw pictures for him and stuff like that and put them together as actual books, which is not easy to do, and it's definitely not inexpensive. Now, life, of course, was going on and continuing, and we ended up at that time we were living in Haines, and then we ended up moving back onto the boats, and we ended up. I won't go into the whole thing. There's, like I said, it's a long story, but we ended up, after this whole thing that happened, being broken down in Haines, not Haines. We went from Haines back onto the boats, and we got broken down, and we were in Ketchikan. So long story short, we ended up in Ketchikan, and we were broken down. The boat was in pretty bad shape. We needed a lot of parts for the engine. And at this time in Ketchikan, there were not a lot of jobs. There wasn't a lot of things to do. It was really difficult to find any kind of work, doing odd jobs or anything else. We picked up every job that we could find, but like I said, not a lot to do. And we were stuck there for a while. And then tourist season rolled around. Summer came, and it was tourist season. And I had this idea, and we all kind of got the same idea, and we sat around and talked about selling the stories to tourists, because we're like, well, we want to sell the books. We want to make something of them. Why don't we try to sell these to tourists? But we didn't have any in print. We didn't have any way to print them as books. So I actually got the idea, what if we recorded them? What if we had Dad record the stories? Because when we were kids, it was a long time ago, I'm probably showing my age here, but we had little cassette tapes that you would plug in, and the cassette tape would read the story, and it would have a little ding when you're supposed to turn the page. And so that was kind of the catalyst for the idea for getting Dad to read the stories into audiobooks. For the children's stories is what they were. Now, audiobooks were not prevalent the way that they are now. They were not something we were incredibly familiar with. So that's why the idea kind of came from those old cassette tapes that you would plug in that would tell the story to you, and you would have the storybook in front of you, and it would ding at the end of the page, and you would flip the page to the next one, and we keep reading it, for like Jack and the Beanstalk and stuff like that. So we found this guy that worked at a church, and I forget exactly everything he did with the church, but he was a big volunteer in town, did a lot of like volunteer work. And one of the things he had done was he built a little recording studio in his house. It was like basically built into a closet. He had a closet that he built a little recording studio so that he could record music for the church. So the church had like a little musical group, their choir, and he would record their music. So he agreed to let Dad, for free, for nothing, just as a good deed, go in and spend all day recording and record as many books as he could in a day. Now, the guy said he didn't really have any ability to edit anything. He was just able to record it and then give us the main copy of the recording. So Dad went in and he recorded several of the stories, several of the kids' books onto into audio. And we were given the audio file. Now, from that, we then had to figure out how to turn that into an audiobook we could sell. And so I went and found another person who had a computer that they let me borrow. They didn't actually let me borrow the computer. They worked nights, and they said that while they were at work, I could be at their house burning the discs. So I figured out how to, took what little money we had and bought up a bunch of blank CDs and went to this person's house, and they showed me how to do it. They were like, this is how you burn a CD. I put in the file for it, and they showed me how to do it. And I would sit there all night long burning all these CDs because it was time consuming. And then we took that and we figured out how to make like a cover for it and all those things. And I'll fast forward a little bit. We got it all put together. And then we went around town trying to figure out how to sell these things to somebody. It turns out like you're not able to just, sell them to people. That's frowned upon. So we had to figure out somewhere that we could sit and sell them. And once we did that, long story short, we went around all over town, tried to talk everyone into letting us set up like a little table and offered to give them like a percentage of our sales or something like that. We ended up meeting a guy named Dave Coates. Now, Dave Coates was a true professional, a real entrepreneur, and he was somebody that really cared about the entrepreneurial spirit. Like he believed in it, right? So when he saw how into it we were and everything that we were putting into what we were doing and the enthusiasm we had for it, it was just this crazy group of kids with their wild hair, fresh from the bush, with this crazy idea of selling these audiobooks. He was like, no, I'll help you out. I'll give you a little spot out front of one of my places. You can put up a card table and keep whatever you sell. You don't have to pay me. Just do your thing. That he appreciated the spirit we had and to just go for it. And so we did. And people really loved the stories. Like we had a lot of really positive response about the stories. Now you weren't allowed to like grab people and tell them about the stories or like yell at them, hey, come check out my stories, or anything like that. So what we came up with was that we had a little boom box that we could play the stories because that was fair. You could play music or whatever. So we would just have one of the CDs playing. So as people would walk by, they would hear our dad's voice reading the story aloud, and they would get curious and they would come over and we'd tell them about it, and they would buy a CD. And we sold a lot of them to quite a few people. And people would keep asking though about our life. Like one of the main things people wanted to know is like, who are you? Where do you come from? What's going on with this? And as we told them about our life and how we lived, there was always this like sparkle in their eyes when they would hear about it, because a lot of people in the tourist industry in Alaska, like they're genuine Alaskans. They carve their own things. They put their stamp on it. They forge their own knives. It's very real, right? Everything that you get up there is very real. But then there are a lot of places that these things are just made in China, right? It's a bunch of the same thing over and over. Because there are a lot of shops that they set up that like big conglomerates and things set up in all these different places where the cruise ships stop. So it's all the same things. They just mass produce stuff that is for Alaska or for the Bahamas or for wherever, and then they sell it at these different ports. But if you turn it over, it all says made in China. So we were very authentic. We were another one of those Alaskan authentic salesmen that were selling something that was really Alaskan and was really made by an Alaskan and was made by an Alaskan family. And people really showed a lot of interest in that because of what we were doing. And I noticed this look in people's eyes that they had. And they would always be like, that's such a great story when we would tell them about our dad and our family and how we lived. So I got the idea. I was like, Dad, you should write a story about your life. You should write this story that we keep telling people, because people, they love the children's stories, but they seem to really like our story. And I think that your life story would be a good story to tell, because also Dad always told us stories about his adventures when he was a kid. He told us about how he grew up and the things that he did and all these adventures that he had and all these adventures that he and Mom had in Alaska. So we had grown up hearing all these adventures and living our own, right? So since we lived the adventures so much, it wasn't that crazy hearing Mom's and Dad's adventures. But then having that outside perspective of all these tourists and people that responded the way they did to all of the stories and the way we were, was like, Dad, you got to write this. It took me over a year to convince Dad to finally sit down and write his story. Because as much as Dad enjoyed talking about himself, not in like a grandiose, egocentric way. He liked to tell a good story, and he loved to sit down and hear other people's stories. And he always said, everybody has a cool story. Everybody's got a story to them, and he loved to hear about people's stories and tell his. And Dad could talk with somebody forever about their life and about his life, but he didn't like to brag, and he felt that some of the things in his life, some of the things that he would be writing about came across like he was bragging. And then there were some things that it was hard for him to write about. When you've been through everything that my dad had been through and being orphaned and all the hard times in his life, it's a difficult thing to sit down and wrap your mind up in for as long as it takes to write it into a book and to try and write it well. And Dad always said, I'm not a writer, I'm just a storyteller. He didn't sit down and try to write something that Hemingway would write. What he ended up doing when I finally convinced him to actually sit down and try to write his autobiography, what he ended up doing was just telling his story. So his book is very much written in the same way that he would sit down and tell you the story. So like if you read One Wave at a Time, my dad's autobiography, it's written as if he's in the room just telling you the story, right? He wasn't trying to be Hemingway. He wasn't trying to make it a New York Times bestseller. My dad had no formal training with writing. He just wrote what he felt. And so that's one thing that makes the story very authentic. Now, when he first came back with a draft for the book, he's like, okay, I did it. And it took him a while. And he's like, okay, I did it. And he handed it to me. And it was like 40, 50, 60 pages worth, 75 at most. It was like a pamphlet, not a book. I was like, Dad, this is not an autobiography. Great, wonderful, awesome that you're finally doing it, but go back and write an actual book. Like, go back and write your story. I want you to get more in depth. I want you to actually feel it and talk about it. And I think what really broke it into something that Dad embraced was that I told him, just sit down and write out like you're telling someone the story. The same way as if somebody was sitting there with you and you're telling them the story. And so he went back, and that time he wrote the real story. He wrote his full autobiography, which was still shorter than it should be because he definitely left stuff out, and he should have written something that was like 10,000 pages. Instead, it ended up being a little over 200. But it's a really good story, and it's an honest account of his life and Mom's and Dad's life together in Alaska, and how they lived their life and their adventures. And so I was like, okay, perfect, awesome, wonderful. So we took that, and Mom did a lot of editing on it, and I typed it up at the library. So Dad wrote it by hand. He always wrote everything by hand, a pencil and a piece of paper. He didn't even like an ink pen. And he definitely didn't like to type, and we had no real access to computers or anything like that. We didn't own a laptop, any of this stuff. So Dad wrote it with just a pencil and a stack of paper. And then Mom took that and she wrote it, edited it, but she did it by hand. So then she just wrote it on a piece of paper. So she did use a pen. And then they gave that to me. Mom gave me what she wrote from what Dad wrote. What she edited by hand, and I took that to the libraries and typed it. Now, I am definitely not a typist, and I've gotten better now definitely better than I used to be, because at that time I was horrible. Like, I was really bad. It took me a long time of going up to the library and sitting there typing with 2 fingers, trying to type this thing out, and then printing it a little bit at a time at the library for free, and bringing that back so that Mom could then go through and edit that and mark everywhere I had made a mistake, and then I could go back and refix that. And so this went on for a while. I'd be embarrassed to say exactly how long it took me to do this, but finally I was able to put it together, typed, edited, a full draft of the book of One Wave at a Time, of my dad's autobiography. And the night that I came home with that from the library, I will never forget how excited everyone was, how excited the whole family was, because it had just become real. It was one thing when we had the idea, It was one thing when Dad sat down and actually wrote the book. It was one thing when Mom edited the book and wrote it out by hand, the edited version, and gave it to me. And it was one thing when I was going to the library every day and trying to type this thing out. It was a completely different thing that night when I brought home that typed manuscript and I set it down and was like, here's the book. And I did it professionally. I have no idea how I managed to do it. Still don't know. Like, it's difficult for me to do everything I'm doing now for the publishing company, let alone then. And I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know how to do any of it. I would look up things of like how to adjust margins and this and that and try and make it work. And somehow, through the grace of the good Lord, I managed to make it work. And I was so proud when I set that manuscript down in front of everybody. I was like, here's the book. Here's One Wave at a Time. There was like a standing ovation. Like, everybody was like, just so happy and so thrilled. And Dad was just beaming, and everybody was slapping down the back like, you did it. You wrote your book. You wrote your autobiography. This is awesome and amazing. And that night, Dad sat down, and he had already read the story to us, of course, after he first finished it. But that night, he sat down and read the finished, edited, typed out version. And it was really cool. It was just really cool, and something that I will never forget, because that was a real turning point for our family and for our family company and for everything we were trying to do. Now that brings me to the next chapter of this story, because from there we decided that it was time to try and create something beyond what we had already done with the books and to pursue turning Dad's autobiography into a real book. Now at that time, we had our little company that we were running, our little publishing company, to produce Dad's children's stories just in the audiobooks. And then the few copies of One Wave we were able to actually put together, which were basically just manuscripts at that time. And we wanted to take these and see if we could find a way to turn them into real books. And we knew that that wasn't something we could really do in Alaska. And we had saved up a lot of money, not a lot of money. For us, it was a lot. And so we had saved up a pretty good amount, and we made our way down to the lower 48. And this was the first time that we had really ever left Alaska. The first time that some of us had ever been out of Alaska. Because the only time I had been out of Alaska, I was really little, because my little brother Gaby was actually born in Texas. And at that time, my dad's great-grandma, my dad's grandma, was still alive. And he wanted her to be around when Gaby was born. And it meant something for Gaby to be born in Texas. And so we went down when I was a little guy. I was like 5 years old, for Gaby to be born, and then came back to Alaska. And that was the only time we had left. So most of the family had never even been out of Alaska. So we went down to the lower 48 with Dad's books, the audio stories, and the One Wave at a Time book, and a wing and a prayer, right, to try and make this real, to make it work, to figure out what we needed to do to make it work. And we didn't know if we were looking for a person or a thing or a place or a business or what, but we thought it was worth it and thought it was worth a try. So we went down south, and we went all over the place here and there with the books, sold quite a few of the audiobooks of the children's stories to people here and there, at ma and pa stores mostly. Like, we would stop and tell them our story and what we were doing, and they would buy some of the audiobooks, and we would get enough fuel to keep on going down the road. And we did that for a little while, and I got the idea about doing like speaking engagements. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself there, because we ended up finding a place where we could print the book. There was a person that helped us put together, take what I had done and the file, and actually print copies of the book. And they did it relatively cheap. It wasn't free, but they did it relatively cheap, and they let us kind of charge it up and then pay it off as we went. They're like, just send me the money to cover what I print for you, and I'll give you like 100 books. And so at that point, we were completely ecstatic that we had that and that we had made it to that point. Because that night, I also remember was super cool because then it went from being just a manuscript to being a real book. And that was the point at which we had a real copy of the book. We had an actual sit down with a cover and a spine and a back. And it even had a barcode because the guy was like a professional printer. And so he got us a barcode and everything. Now, I remember he charged us for the stuff, but he definitely did not charge the price that it actually was. Like, the guy really helped us out, and he let us charge it and pay it off later, or pay it as we go. And so then the question was like, well, how do we sell these? Where do we go? And at that time, we were staying in Nashville, Tennessee, so in that area. And I had the idea, I was like, okay, well, we need to sell these to someone. And I forget exactly what happened. I think it was actually like one of those things like on a movie, because I was in a filling station or something and I saw a newspaper. And on this newspaper, it said something about a Rotary Club and a service club, and that they were looking for speakers. And I was like, okay, Dak can talk. They're looking for speakers. I was like, I wonder if they would let us sell the book at their club. So I I bought the newspaper, I tore out the part with the number, and I went to a payphone, actually, back then, which for anyone listening that doesn't know what a payphone is, they used to have like booths with phones in them, and you would pump quarters into it to make a phone call, right? Long before we ever had a cell phone. And so I went to a payphone, punched the numbers in, and talked to the person that answered about the Rotary Club. And I was like, so you're looking for a speaker for your Rotary Club? Well, do I have the speaker for you? And I went on to tell him about my dad, and that he was a real bush Alaskan, and we were down here on a book tour, and he would love to come talk about his life of adventures in Alaska and his autobiography, One Wave at a Time. And everyone I talked to about, they were really, really excited. Like the first lady, super excited. She was like, well, we love Alaska, would love to have that. You know, our last speaker was actually really boring, and this sounds exciting. And I was like, well, can I sell the book there? And she was like, of course. You know, you get 15 minutes for your dad to talk while everybody's having their lunch in the middle of the meeting. And you can tell them that you have the books for sale. And then if anybody that wants to buy one at the end of the meeting, they can come over to y'all guys and buy a book. And so, again, when I got home and told everybody this, I was very proud of myself. Like, I was really proud, really happy that I figured it out, made it work. I didn't really tell anybody what I was doing until I had already kind of set it up. And then I was like, Dad, how would you like to go speak at a Rotary Club? So that started our speaking engagements. And from there, it just kind of snowballed, because I was like, well, okay, how many service clubs are there? Because that was a Rotary Club. And I was like, okay, well, there are more service clubs. So then I found a directory that had like all these different service clubs, you know, Kiwanis clubs, Lions clubs, all these things, which are actually really cool groups of people who do a lot of work with like their communities and a lot of volunteer work. And it's primarily made up of a bunch of like business owners and things from the community that go to these clubs and figure out how they can all donate their money to the same place, and what they can volunteer for to help build up their communities. And I think that's really cool. And it was cool for us to be able to be, you know, part of those things, and to bring the meetings up a little bit and make it more lively and give everybody a little bit of entertainment and whatnot while they were at the meetings. And we met a lot of cool people, a lot of really nice people, and a lot of people were very enthusiastic about the book and just loved it. I actually recently found because we didn't have cameras or really any way to record anything back then, but I found recently a file on one of my old computers that we spoke at one Rotary Club, and it was filmed. It was a really big Rotary Club. A lot of them were like smaller places, but this one was super big. This was like a really gigantic Rotary Club, and people from all over the place came to this club. It was a meeting of other clubs is what it was. So where there were the little Rotary clubs, and then they had a big meeting where all of the different Rotary clubs came together, and that's what this was. And because we had spoken to so many Rotary clubs, Dad got invited as the guest speaker for this thing, which was a big deal. Definitely a big deal for us. And it was filmed. Anyway, they filmed the meeting. And so Dad, his presentation was filmed. And at the end of that, the lady came up to me and gave me a copy of the recording, which I thought was super cool. And I kept that with me. And then, many years later, ended up with a laptop and a computer where I could actually record it and play it. And I thought that had been lost. And I very recently, like in the last few weeks, found that footage. Very emotional to find that at this point in my life, so many years later, and Dad having passed, and to watch that, very emotional. Took me right back to those times. But anyway, back to the story. So we did this for a while, and we also we did some volunteer stuff. Like there was one place, it was a blind school. It was a school for blind children. And Dad went back there probably like 20 times reading to those kids and just reading his children's stories to them, and made friends with a lot of the little guys, because something Dad really wanted to do, something he talked about doing the whole time, was going into hospitals and reading to like sick kids and stuff like that. And there were a lot of legalities to being able to do those things, and we were really nobody. We had no status, no money, no sway with anyone, so it's not like Dad was a celebrity wanting to do those things. So the hospitals really shot us down, and they got us with a lot of red tape. I ended up meeting and talking to a lot of really nice doctors and people that worked like in the hospitals that would have loved to have done it. But then the people that actually like made up the rules and like owned the hospitals and things really stopped us and put up a wall where we couldn't do that. But it wasn't the same with the blind school. Dad could go in there and read to him as many times as he wanted to. And so we actually hung around in this one area way longer than we had planned, just because Dad kept going back to that blind school and wanting to read to those kids. And that's admirable. I thought it was really cool that Dad was that type guy, because it's something that meant a lot to Dad. We also went to a lot of churches and did a lot of speaking at churches and things like that. And most of the churches, Dad wanted to just go in and do his thing without selling the book. He's like, we should just give them copies. I was always the guy that was like, nope, I'm not running a charity here. For the blind school, that's cool for people like that. But no, everywhere else, I'm selling the book. So the churches were cool with it, though, because they wanted to buy the book. Also, they were all like, no, we want to buy the book. Let us buy the book. Let us help y'all guys out. You're a cool family. You're a Christian family. You're doing something we all believe in. We think it's great, the values that your stories have and that your autobiography has. So y'all guys keep doing your thing. We want to buy some books. And we ended up not only paying off the 100 books that we had gotten, but ordering quite a few more in that time. And then time passed, and it was time to go back to Alaska. And so we made our way back to Alaska. And I got the idea, because there just weren't enough people to sell stuff to in Alaska, and tourist season is only so long. So I was like, okay, I had more experience now with the internet, from going to libraries and things and working on the internet and finding the service clubs and things on the internet. And I was like, okay, we need a website. I need to start a website. That's how we need to sell the book. It took me probably a year to start the first website, to figure it out and to get it going. And at this point in my life, here in modern day, I've probably started 20 different websites, because for one reason or another, they just didn't work out. They got shut down, or I wasn't able to keep it running, or I ran out of funds, or whatever happened. I've probably started 20 different websites before having the one that I have now, which I'm hoping is the one that sticks. This is the one that's going to really make it this time. But anyway, back then I started several, and just kept starting them and kept doing it, kept trying to learn, and how do I make it work, and how do I build this, and how do I make it all go together. And at this time, we had always messed around with having cameras every now and then. Like, my dad loved cameras. I grew up doing photography. I was 6 years old when my dad gave me my first camera, old 35 millimeter Canon film camera. Was super cool. I had that thing for a very long time. And my dad bought one of the first like camcorders that you could buy way back, recorded on tapes, and we loved those kinds of things. So with some of the money we had made from the books and whatnot, and with some of our savings, we bought an old camcorder, which was a really good camcorder, actually. Like, this one wasn't like our old like terrible credit camcorders. This one was really good quality because we wanted to film good stuff, right? And we, at this time, I had discovered YouTube long ago, long before it is like it is now. When I first discovered YouTube, I was one of the first, like, I think 1,000 people to sign up for it or something like that, or first 2,000 people. It's something crazy like that. And back then, you didn't need an email address. There were no ads. There was no nothing. It was just the Wild West of internet, right? You could put up anything you wanted to, any length of video. It was owned by like a private company, and they didn't care what you did. So it was long before like Google or anybody bought it. And we would film videos and put it on YouTube. And we filmed some of our hunts and things like that. So we would go hunting. And I've always been a movie buff. All of us have. We always loved movies and stuff. So we filmed our hunts like it was a movie. And we loved like Travel Channel shows and things like that, like guys that would go down and sail the Bahamas and all those things. So we filmed our hunts as if it was a movie or a Travel Channel show. And this dude saw some of our YouTube videos. What was his name? I cannot remember his name. It'll come to me later. But his website was called myoutdoortv.com. And he was like, guys, I love what you're doing. I would love to put some of these videos on myoutdoortv.com, my website. And we found out later this guy was sort of a big deal, that he like was one of the co-founders of CMT, the country music television, the MTV of country music, CMT. And he had started the website, myoutdoortv.com, and we were like, okay, cool, sounds neat. So we sent him some of our videos, and he put them up there, and it was pretty cool. And like, I think we did really well making the videos. I wish that I had that footage. It exists somewhere. So I really so much wish I could find all that footage, because it was really good and it would be awesome to have. And a little thing here, some of the footage we filmed, some of the things we shot, and some of the stuff that I actually directed and put together made it into several of our first episodes that aired on the Discovery Channel, which I thought was cool. So anyway, back to the story. I digress. At this point, we were running our little YouTube stuff. I had the website going, and we were putting videos out on myoutdoortv.com. And we didn't know this at the time, but apparently the Discovery Channel and a bunch of other channels were starting up a lot of their Alaskan reality shows. And now, back then, reality shows weren't the same as they are now. It wasn't. They weren't as prevalent and things as they are now. Now it's a total genre. Back then, it was a different kind of thing. As much as there were a lot of them, it wasn't how it is now. It wasn't like a set thing. And so they were looking for authentic bush families to make Alaskan reality shows from, right? Now, when I would check the emails for the website, mostly it was like people that wrote in that really enjoyed my dad's books, or they loved our YouTube stuff, or they really enjoyed myoutdoortv.com. It was, it's the people from Australia and things, or just all kinds of people that would write in that liked our story and enjoyed what we were doing. And I started getting these emails mixed in there of people that were saying that they worked for production companies and wanted to like film something with us, and that they thought they could maybe sell it to a television network and that we could start a TV show. Now, of course, I thought that this was just a scam, right? I mean, obviously it's a scam, right? I mean, I had gotten, scam emails before, and I wasn't an idiot. I wasn't a dunce. I knew, scam emails, so I just deleted them. I was like, this isn't legit. It's a scam. I probably deleted 20 or 30 of those emails of people being like, I'm with such and such production company, would love to film something with your family. The Discovery Channel's looking for something, or National Geographic's looking for something, and all these different company names and television names. And, who hadn't heard of the Discovery Channel or National Geographic, right? So I was like, there's no way. This isn't legit. And it was always from like email addresses for like these production companies you had never heard of. So I was like, nah, this isn't real. It's a scam. But they just kept coming though. I just kept getting them. There were so many of them. And like I said, I think I deleted like 25, 30 of these emails. Definitely more than 20. And then one day I was just like, okay, let's take this to Dad and see what he says. So I printed one of them out at the library, and I took the email to Dad and showed it to him. And he was like, okay, this is kind of interesting. Oh, and you've gotten 30 of these? I was like, yeah, I've gotten quite a few of them. I've just been deleting them. This is a scam, right? And Dad was like, well, I don't know. Maybe we should call the phone number and find out. And so we called the phone number, and it was a production company that was like, no, this is real. This is not a scam. I'm not asking you for money. What I would like to do is to fly a film crew out to wherever y'all guys are and sit down and do some interviews with your family and talk to y'all guys and just hear about your lives. And I'm going to take that footage to the people that I know over here at the Discovery Corporation who are looking for authentic Bush families to start reality shows with. And at that time, I think they had a few families that they were potentially thinking about or had gotten in contact with. We later found out that most of those didn't pan out because they were families that didn't live in the bush full time. And we did. So they were very enthusiastic about wanting us. Also, we're a big family. We're all kind of crazy. You know, we don't fit into the normal mold of like what you expect when you're dealing with even bush people. And so, you know, fast forward a little while later, they sent a film crew out, and we sat down and we did interviews, and they asked us what an iPhone was, which at that time didn't know it was just a cell phone. I knew what a cell phone was. You know, we didn't have one. I had never owned one. I don't think I had ever used one. No, I had used one because a lady let me borrow her cell phone to make some phone calls once when I was calling some of those Rotary clubs. So I had used a cell phone, had never owned one, and definitely didn't know that an iPhone was just a brand of cell phone. I didn't know what an iPhone was. None of us did. Definitely had never heard of a lot of the like people they were talking about, because they did like a pop culture quiz thing. And, you know, when you start talking about like modern pop stars, even now, I don't know who you're talking about. I have no idea. I know who Def Leppard is. I know who Stevie Ray Vaughan is. I know who Axl Rose is. I have no idea about modern pop singers. So they then took that footage of us sitting down for interviews and then doing some like, you know, promo shots of the family and whatnot back to the Discovery Channel, and almost immediately got a green light. They almost immediately, Discovery's like, no, let's film some episodes with these people. Love it, love it, love it. So it was probably not even like a month later, I think, they were like, okay, we want to film with y'all guys. What are your plans for the future? And at this time, my family was, I wasn't one that was very enthusiastic about this plan. I love the boats. I grew up on boats. Like, my earliest memories are on boats. I love the ocean. The land doesn't move right. But a lot of my family wanted to move further inland, and they wanted to try moving up further up north. It was near, I believe it was the Copper River area was where we were moving. And much like when I was a kid and we moved off Gypsy Girl when I was a little guy, Gypsy was the first boat we lived on when I was a little kid. And I was about 9 years old when we moved off Gypsy and moved up to Haynes. And I emphatically did not want to do that. I really hated it. It's you know, it's like when I guess it's an experience a lot of people have as kids where their parents move and they move to a new town and you lose all your friends and you lose the home that you love. And for me, it was different, but the same, because that home I loved was that boat. It was Gypsy. And my friends were was the ocean and the wolves and the sea. And I hated it. I hated moving off that boat and moving up to Haynes. But that is a story for another time. So back onto this story. So the production companies asked what we wanted to do and where we were going. And my family wanted to move up further up north and get some property up there. So the production company said, okay, we'd love to follow y'all guys and just film what you're doing. And so, you know, we went up north and we did what we do, you know, which what we do is we just show up wherever we are and we build what we need to survive and we gather what we need to live. And so that's what we did. And that's what we did on the show. And that ended up being the first half of the first season of Alaskan Bush People, is what it was. Because the first season of Alaskan Bush People got broken up into two halves. So the first half was up north with us building on our property there and setting up shop. And then the second part of the first season, the second half of the first season, was in Ketchikan, and then later on Chichikov Island, which was where we moved up to Browntown. And so that was the second half of the first season, because once we went up towards, Copper River and that area and everything, it was as terrible as I thought it was going to be. And everybody was ready to move back towards the ocean and be back on the boats and back on the water, which I was very enthusiastic about and definitely voted let's do that. Because like I said, I love the ocean and I love being on boats. But at the close of the first season, the first half of the first season, we stopped filming, and we had pretty much decided at that point, we're pulling the plug on this. Let's move back to Southeast Alaska. It's terrible up here. Great for the people that love it here, but not for us. Southeast is where we're going. It was months before we heard from anyone. Like they left, and we didn't hear from anybody. No phone calls, nothing. Couldn't get a hold of anybody. And enough time passed that we were like, well, I guess the show's not a thing. I guess they didn't want it. Let's just go on with our life. So, a few months passed, and we were in Ketchikan, planning our big push to get back to Southeast and find property up there. And at that time, I think we were looking at possibly moving to Kodiak, looking at property in Kodiak. I think it was between Kodiak, somewhere on the back end of Prince of Wales, which just wasn't far enough in the bush for us. And then there was the property at Chichikov. And we pretty much settled on the Chichikov property, and we were saving up money and working odd jobs and selling books and doing everything that we could to get up there when we finally got contacted back by the production company and the Discovery Corporation. And what had happened was that they loved it so much that they wanted to hold it for the next run of shows. They didn't want to just put it out immediately. And at first we were actually going to air on Animal Planet, not the Discovery Channel. But the Discovery Corporation loved our show so much and loved the family so much. They're like, no, we want to hold on to this and put it out with the next run of new shows that we're doing the following year. And we want this to be a front runner show for our Alaskan shows on the Discovery Channel the following year. So when they contacted us about continuing to do the show, we were saving up for a piece of property and working odd jobs and all kinds of stuff. So we're like, sure, let's do it. You're going to just film us doing our thing like last time. And they're like, yeah, that's what we're going to do. And so we're like, cool, let's do it. And they showed up and we kept filming the show. And the rest, as they say, is history. So that's really how the show came about. That's how Alaskan Bush People started. That is the story. Pretty much, I'm cutting some corners here and there on the story. I had to condense it down a little bit, but that is the somewhat long-ish short version of how Alaskan Bush People came about and what started the show. So I guess in a nutshell, it boils down to my dad's autobiography, the websites we were running, and the videos and things we were filming for myoutdoortv.com and YouTube and whatnot, was really the catalyst for everything. And then those 30-something emails that I deleted, threw away, and thought were a scam. But we took a chance on it. It wasn't a scam. It was real. It was legit. And we became a very well-known and somewhat universally loved show, Alaskan Bush People. And if y'all guys are listening to this and you've never seen the show, you should definitely go check it out. If you like Alaskan shows, if you're all about family and faith and freedom the way that we are, if you want to check something like that out, if you enjoy those kinds of things, I definitely say give it a go. And if you're somebody that already knows the show, if y'all guys are someone that has enjoyed the show or that you've been with us from the beginning, or if you just found it and are enjoying it, I want to say thank you very much for being fans of the show and honorary members of the Wolfpack, because this has been a good journey. It has been a lot of fun. There's definitely been way more good come from being on the show than any bad. It's been quite the adventure. It's an adventure that I was I feel very fortunate to have been a part of. It's super cool that our show lives on and is something that I don't think has ever stopped airing since it first started airing. And so many people love it and they're so enthusiastic about it. And like we grew up watching like Discovery Channel documentaries about cheetahs and stuff. So it's pretty cool that our family became one of those documentaries about the wild animals, but we are the wild animals that it was documenting. So I just think that's super cool. I think it's really cool to be part of that, to be part of that kind of history, and that we got to do it as a family, and that we had those experiences and all those adventures, and that all of y'all got to share those adventures with us. All right, guys, I'm going to get going. Thank you very much for sitting down with me for a little bit and hearing the story of how Alaskan Bush People came about. All right, y'all guys, have a good one. Stay safe, and always respect the danger.